So, hello for everybody, and it is a big pleasure for me to open our seminar, and first of all to welcome our guests, colleagues and friends, Professor Catherine Hasa and Dr. Lars Butin, who came especially for us, and I am proud and the honor for me to say welcome. And from the very beginning, I want to say that we are not only happy that you come, and not only see this meeting as a regular one where somebody, in this case you, in other case somebody else, presents their results and we discuss it, which is normal. I see in this meeting much more. It is a kind of step ahead in our collaboration in the field of research, which is not so developed in our country and in the whole world too. And I believe, I actually sure that we do a very important step, not just meeting for politeness and even for advancement in our research. Why I think so? First of all, because actually the education and technology in education from the one hand, and philosophy and philosophy in education for the other hand, there's a very big gap in this field. Nothing to say. Usually people who are working in the field of education and even technology education, very practical, which is fine. And research in this field, mostly practical and pragmatic. While usually research in the philosophy, nothing to say, it's theoretical one, academical, which is also fine, but it's different. And to make it together, it's something which is unacceptable, usually not regular, from the one hand. From the other hand, we do believe, and we'll talk about that, that it is exactly the time which we cannot not to take care about to make it this gap smaller. And because of that, from the one hand, I can say that your field of research, which is philosophy of technology, is a hot topic. On the other hand, it's not just hot topic, it's also cool topic. I like that it together. And why I call it cool topic? Because it's actually facilitating us to think differently, not as a regular one. And I call for all of you who came, thank you very much for coming, that to think together with our guests, with our friends, how can we go ahead in this field? First of all, why I talk, and I told you that it's far away each other, because actually technology and advances in technology, and specifically in education, going in so big, so briefly, so big speed, we have no time to think about that. And because of that, actually, technology in education became a very, very pragmatic. And the field of philosophy stay on the same philosophical level and high level of research. And how to connect them? I personally realized that it's very important maybe 10 years ago, when just I felt something is wrong in the research I'm doing, being a person with exact science background and technology. And I think that something I lose something. And when I read a couple of books of philosophers in technology, I understood that it is a field where I have to go, and I switched 10 years ago to this field. Actually, when I summarized and going back, why I did it, actually I see two main points. The first point was when I realized that mainly the common perception of technology in education is strongly instrumental. And this understanding of technology is wrong. It is known in philosophy, but in practice it's so fine. Nobody cares about that. But when we arrive to the advances of technology, cloud computing, artificial intelligence, and so on, it's already unavoidable to go deeper in understanding of technology. It's impossible not to take care about relations between person from the one hand, technology on the other hand, and the whole world. And this triangle, actually, the top triangle, which is post-phenomenology, take care about it. It is the first point. The second point, a little bit different. In the research I made with my colleagues in our research team during the last 4 years, we studied the changes of human consciousness as a symptom of digital revolution. And we, I'm sorry to say, came to conclusion that there is no so changes in teachers' consciousness. What does it mean? There is no revolution. We believe that it is. What's the problem? And one of the ways to realize the problem was to understand the principal problem in philosophy, and it's better to say in our worldview. Our worldview, our consciousness is built in traditional Cartesian understanding of the world. I mean of the whole world, which is fine. We like Descartes, it's fine with us. But it's not enough to understand complicated phenomenon which we see here with digitalization of education, the digitalization of the whole world. And in this case, again, post-phenomenology gave us a chance to think different. So our meeting and starting collaboration with Dr. Galit Wellner, it was very good step in this field. Galit is one of few philosophers on technology in our country and well known in abroad, which is a good symptom to understand what's going on here. And her beautiful and again cool works in this field, actually very nice, and people know about that. So we started working. It only started work. We just, it is from the beginning. Our team, you see here, our team already ready to go ahead and visit of our colleagues and our friends. It's a very good step for all of us to be together and to believe for our bright future in this field. So again, welcome very much, and please go ahead. Thank you. I will present you. Okay.
While the setup is being done for the presentation, I will present Professor Hasa. She's Catherine Hasa is a professor at the Aarhus University in Denmark. Originally, she comes from anthropology, which may give you a certain understanding of philosophy of technology as a field that is very interdisciplinary. And we will talk about interdisciplinarity a lot today. Some of her research, for example, is how people learn physics, but not just learn it, how they learn to become physicists, which is slightly different than, studying physics. And she tries to study these kind of unseen elements. She has some beautiful projects, and we will hear some of them today here. So Catherine, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Galit. I'll see if I can get my, fine. That's perfect.
Yeah, but I want to put it also on the Zoom.
Oh.
With the share screen.
Oh, then.
Yeah. Now it's shared. Okay, now it's
yeah. Thank you so much. And first of all, thank you so much for inviting me and opening up for this collaboration. It's been a pleasure already meeting colleagues from here, and of course I already know Galit and her work. So it's as you said, Ilya, I think it's a very good opportunity to learn from each other. So what I will do is that I will first of all see how I change the slides.
You just click on
okay.
it. Yeah.
So great. So I will not go here and lecture you about what is educational technology, but I will point to some aspects of educational technology that sometimes are overlooked, namely that educational technologies also are connected with learning. at my university, that fact is often overlooked. And here I will dive into my own interest, which is about learning. What is learning? And how does learning both open and close our perceptions and imaginaries of the world? So trying to broaden the idea of educational technology. And I've been inspired by several learning theories during my time, but since the last 5-10 years maybe, I have been inspired to connect post-phenomenology with my basically Vygotskian background in learning. Because Vygotsky is a very interesting, inspirational thinker for me as an anthropologist, because he also has a cultural perspective, which I really like. And this is what I've written some books about. And then finally, a newcomer to this kind of thinking in my own work is the idea of Socratic ignorance as a way of opening for learning and new kinds of imaginaries. But this is actually a bit work in progress. You will not find things about it in my books. I've been the PI of several EU projects, and I've been in Denmark conducting many studies on learning in educational settings, schools, universities, and so on. And it's from there that my interest has evolved in learning theory and also learning in human technology relations. And I will not say that much about my own work, but just say that for me, learning is the basic process that changes the perception we have, even the way we perceive materials in our surroundings, our habits, but also what surprises us and what we can find innovative. And these learning processes come about in relations, but more they come about as processes of relations. So we need to understand what learning is to understand these processes.
Allow me just to set.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I can see them. This here, this is here.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That should
better.
Yeah.
Yeah. Recording is fine. I just moved.
So I'm not going to repeat what Ilya was saying about educational technology, but the problem of educational technology is that it comes with a lot of promises, and they are usually focused on the technology side of human technology relations, whereas the human side is somewhat overlooked in these relations. And I want to put it back, and I think some of the problems with educational technologies today might be we have overlooked the human, the embodied human, that is, also from a phenomenological perspective. So now I can't change the slides. I don't know why. Okay, I could. I just have to. I could do it. Yeah. So I run a program at Aarhus University called Future Technology, Culture and Learning, which then also is my field. And we have a number of ongoing research in educational technologies from this perspective. So it's not, of lately, we've worked a lot with educational robots, but we work with iPads in schools, with smart boards, all kinds of different MOOCs also. But our main question is about how we learn with these technologies, how people actually learn, and not just how we say we learn. So we study through ethnographic methods how these technologies are engaging people in classrooms or not engaging people, but also in a broader sense. And as I said, my interest in learning comes from Lev Vygotsky's work, and I will not say that much about him. I assume somehow that you are familiar with his work, and the reason I've been so inspired by him is because if in my reading of Vygotsky, his learning theory is informing us of how a material world is changing us, and we are changing a material world in return. And that's a very through learning. And he can even explain the basic processes of learning that makes this happen. And one of the things is that we learn through these transformations that then become the point of departure for new transformations, and that we're not free to learn anything. We are actually embedded in the way we learn in a material world with our own background as learners. And that transforms the material, the way we actually perceive materials in the world. For instance, one of the examples is clock example. Everyone here in this room immediately see the clock, but he reminds us that brain-injured patients might see a white circle with some strange unknown black dots. So we have learned to see a clock somehow at some point in our learning process, and now we can't see that it's not a clock. And that is very important also in a post-phenomenological perspective, because here we also lean on the idea of epoche, the way of sort of going back and trying to see the world as it appears, as it can appear. And here it's important to understand that most of what we perceive is already conceptualized in ways that make us see it in a particular way. And when we then take learning as a point of departure, it also means that we have trouble seeing things, you know, as other people see them, or as they could be seen, because we have sort of already decided this is a clock, so we see the two faces. And then it makes it difficult for us to see the vase. You probably know this example. And now when we are learning so much through educational technologies that draw in new kinds of pictures in our everyday lives, from all over the world, all kinds of media, things come with these educational technologies. The time has come to question this kind of instrumental learning that we all know, also from my department of education, is quite prevalent, and begin to ask questions about how do people actually learn and go deeper into that. And what I want to discuss today is how we learn through technologies to shape imaginaries in particular ways, through what we have learned, but also from a particular interesting aspects of imaginaries, namely that they can be what Vygotsky called realist or fantasy imaginaries. And I will try and make an addition to his work, saying they can also be roadmap imaginaries. That was not in the paper that our discussants have read, but that's something I keep working on. So for Vygotsky, we have potentials for learning also, and these potentials are always also drawing on what we have already learned, as I said. And in imaginaries, we will see that people combine things they already know, both in fantasy imaginaries and in realist imaginaries. And of course, there might be many more imaginaries, but I'm just taking these two as examples. So a witch, for example, we all know elder women. So these hats we put on and a broomstick, and then we conceptualize it. We already see a witch. And we all know, or think we know, that witches are probably fantasy figures. They don't exist in real life. We don't know any women who can put themselves on a broomstick and fly away. So we think they are, we acknowledge them as fantasy. In the realist imaginary, we, on the other hand, according to Vygotsky, can see something we have never experienced ourselves, but still believe it's there. So I've never seen a leopard, probably, I don't know if you have, but I haven't. but I believe it to be true when I see it on the internet. And then I want to add to this fantasy imaginaries as a kind of roadmap for futures. So you imagined a human with wings, Icarus, and that became an imaginary of human flying. And these kinds of imaginaries are sort of leading our way in the way we then try to transform the world through our engagements with technology. So imagination is, as Galit has said, very tightly linked to perception, and the way our technologies are shaping our imaginaries change with the technologies we have available. And in the times of the printing press, we could see that people could print some things, and they had what they would believe to be realist imaginaries about unknown worlds. So they were mapping creatures from these worlds, which were hairy women, humans with one eye or whatever. They were biological human imaginaries, not technological, as pointed out by Don Ide, the philosopher we have been speaking about, where he said that, interestingly enough, in the High Middle Ages, a new kind of imaginaries came into being, which was not about bio creatures, but was about technological imaginaries. They were not realist, because people knew you couldn't have this kind of ship that would sail in the air, but they could imagine it and then use it as a kind of roadmap for dreams where to go. And that has been what has saturated our technological culture today, as Ida says. So what I argue here is that now there are three kinds of imaginaries in educational technologies. We are presented with a lot of images and things and apps and different kind of technological tools in iPads and so on. Some of them are fantasy imaginaries. Some of them are realist imaginaries, and some of them are kind of roadmap imaginaries as a world of living robots, for instance. But all of these imaginaries are then tied to the idea that we think we know. We think we know what is realist, and we think we know what is imaginary, and also what is roadmap. And here I think we need some new theories to understand better that this thinking we know needs to be dissolved a little bit. And I think a post-human learning theory might do that trick, connecting post-phenomenology with science and technology studies, but also with Vygotsky, in my take. And so the question then becomes, what is this post-human learning? Well, first of all, it is doing away with this instrumental understanding of a human being. So a human being cannot be understood as an autonomous, segregated individual that is separated from our material world, self-governed, very rational, and so on. Instead, there are different answers to how we should formulate post-humanist learning, but we are now seen as embodied beings that are always entangled in our material surroundings and becoming with them. And it's these entanglements that we have to study and look for as our tools for learning. So what is actually going into the learning? The body in technology from post-phenomenology is our starting point, you could say. With Merleau-Ponty, it's the third point of departure from where the world is emerging for us. And that world is tied to our cultural and physical movements, like Ida has pointed out in this theory of body one, body two. And we are today bodies in technology. We're already embedded in this kind of being and becoming with technologies. We can't no longer say we are confined to an isolated bio body. We are becoming and learning with and through technologies all the time. And in this, we are also learning imaginaries. And these imaginaries are not something we can take for granted, that we know what is realist and what is fantasy. Because we never know what kind of designs or what kind of outcomes of learning is taking place. So you can make an educational technology, you can say that you want children to learn about leopards, but you really don't know what kind of entanglements is going into this kind of learning processes. And that's why I think we need Socratic ignorance to teach our children and grown-ups as well, that we need to open ourselves for acknowledging that we don't necessarily know. So when we perceive a leopard or a witch, we cannot assume on the first hand that, oh, a witch is just an imagined being, a leopard is a reality. I know that sounds a bit far-fetched, but from my point of view, it's part of these entanglements. We have to learn to be open for new understandings of how the world is becoming. And for some people, witches are real. We know that in anthropology. And maybe the last leopard has already died out. We don't know as I speak. And maybe the kind of leopard we used to see doesn't exist other places than in media, because they simply are only in the zoological garden, or what do I know. So we have to acknowledge that we should be open for what is fantasy and what is realist imaginaries. That's the point. We can't assume it. And even our roadmap technologies, I have students who sincerely believe that you already have intelligent robots walking around that can speak like humans, that you can order to become your butler and so on. And I don't think that is a realist imaginary, but for them, it's a realist imaginary. And of course, these imaginaries have to be challenged, and Socratic ignorance then could be a way to do it and to make us not just repeat the imaginaries that we already meet, but also try to think about new entanglements in our work with educational technologies. Pursue open inquiries and accept that what we might see as unrealistic fantasies might be someday real, but not in the way we imagined, probably. So this kind of new human is not the old human of the humanist thinking. It's a post-human that can become as a human with all kinds of entanglements. And through our bodies, we can experience both the media and in a praxis, and we will be able to learn from both. So to sum up, through these educational technologies, we also learn, we learn other things, but we also learn imaginaries, and they can be seen as three kinds of imaginaries: realist, fantasy, and roadmap imaginaries. And we need to have Socratic ignorance to open up for understanding of which is which. So in this world of educational technology, we are bombarded with all kinds of media images, and this kind of approach might be a way to go to both inspire us to create a better world, another world, but also to understand something about how reality comes into our becoming, our embodied becoming. And here we can use Socratic ignorance. So that's basically my argument. Thank you.
Questions for clarifications, we can take them now. And if not, we switch to Lars' presentation. Yeah.
And you're also welcome to write me or, you know, ask for.
We will have a whole discussion later on. Okay, good. So I'm happy to present our next speaker, Dr. Lars Botin from Aalborg University. Aalborg University is famous in Denmark for being the UNESCO chair for PBL. Okay, they are recognized by UNESCO as the expert for PBL. And from PBL, I was there. They teach PBL, engineering students, architecture, medicine. It's very interesting way of teaching. The whole university goes through PBL. And with this in mind, Lars is part of this project. He teaches, for example, architecture students, engineering students, and they developed a new group that is named Techno Anthropology. I assisted this group with some works. It's very interesting the way they integrate the philosophy of technology, anthropology, PBL, and try to come up with something very new, very exciting. It's a new experience for the students as well, not to mention the lecturers, but also for the lecturers. It's a different way of teaching, of being in class, being with the students. Yep. Are we okay?
Yeah, we just can share the screen on the Zoom.
No share? Okay. Okay, so let's do it without the sharing.
Because no, I'm not on Zoom.
You have to switch to this computer that it is without
Yeah,
nothing
okay.
to do.
It's with sound. So
Sound is
people out there need not see. You can see. There has to be some advantage of being here physically. So here it is. And Galit almost told everything that I'm gonna say. No, I guess I'm gonna add something to what Galit said in her presentation. But yes, what I'm gonna talk about today is cased on techno-anthropology, which is this education that I initiated together with some other colleagues around 12 years ago, 2010, again 2011. And I was pretty wild back then, actually, thinking about the new interdisciplinary programs like techno-anthropology. The year before, I was also participating in initiating other education at Aalborg University, which was again a hybrid affair in between humanities and engineering, which is still existing. I'm not doing much on that education any longer, which is called art and technology. So that's basically always been my interest, doing these combinations of interdisciplinary character in between educations and making them concrete, educations and research areas. And back then, at the same time, actually, I co-wrote a publication on hybrid imagination together with an American professor, Andrew Jamison, and another Danish researcher, Sten Hugo Christensen, on hybrid imagination, where we actually cased our thoughts of what is hybrid imagination in a institutional framework like the university, and why is it needed at all. And I think the need has not grown lesser since then, back in 2011. On the contrary, we need all our resources from humanities, social science, technical sciences, and natural sciences. We need to gather in order to meet the problems and the challenges. I know I talk problems mainly, and not challenges. Challenges is sort of a euphemism of what we are actually facing. We are in problematic conditions, and we need to meet these problems, and that's why interdisciplinary approaches are necessary in the end. And how do I change here? Do I
Maybe
do
from
that
here?
on my computer or?
Yeah,
Maybe
Probably.
from your computer.
Yeah.
second.
So
Yeah.
this is just short about me. Yeah, as a professor in Techno Anthropology, I'm head of the program at Aalborg University, Copenhagen. And you see me on my little boat sailing away from the university, which is there in the background. It's very beautiful, sited in the south part of Copenhagen in an old industrial area where the port was. These are some of my publications that shows where I'm at, philosophy of technology, like Galit and Katrine, known for many years by now. Technology assessment, which this book is about. I come from a background which is philosophy and history of art. So that's my degree, master's degree back then in the 80s. And I've sort of kept some sort of love in relation to architecture that shines through, which is one of the later publications on post-phenomenology in architecture that I edited a year ago. And for some odd reason, I also am into health informatics. I did my PhD on health informatics in a cultural perspective back in the beginning of the millennium. I was sort of forced into it. You know, I had to do a PhD where nobody was interested in art and architecture because no employment. But health IT, yeah, okay. I can do health IT. Why not? So I looked at, and I think the title of the PhD was A Humanist in the Hospital, Cultural Analysis of Electronic Health Records. That was the title. It was pretty wild. It's succeeded. Yeah, and then I'm gonna do some advertising as well on a conference that I'm organizing together with Ole B. Jensen from Architecture and Design Department at Aalborg University, where Galit is going to be. Yeah, you're going to be part of it, and Katrine is going to be one of the keynote speakers at the conference, which has the title "Designing the Techno Anthropocene." And the reason why it's entitled in that way is actually alongside what Katrine was talking about earlier. The importance of technology in relation what it means to be human. Because there's some sort of hubris in the way that we address ourselves in relation to the world in the concept of the Anthropocene. Because we think we are, you know, we change everything on every sort of level, biological, geological, whatever you can think of. But we wouldn't be able to do any sort of that if it hadn't been for technology. So we are in the age of the Techno-Anthropocene, and we could even argue we've not been in the Techno-Anthropocene ever since we became human, because we've changed our context ever since we began to act as such. As we changed from hunters and collectors into farming the land, we changed the whole context of our environment. So, but I'll talk more about that in the opening talk at the conference, which is happening from the 5th to the 7th of July in Copenhagen, and you see the same bridge. I was sailing there in my boat on the former slide, and it's a very beautiful location, I have to say. Okay, let me turn, and Galit was talking about it, my attention towards where I come from. And that's Aalborg University. Aalborg University was established back in 1972. So it's a bit more than What's that?
50 years.
That's 50 years. Okay. Why haven't we had the celebration? No, it's 74.
Ah.
It's 74. That's the reason why we didn't have the celebration.
So we should come again in 2
Yeah,
years.
in 2 years. Return back to Aalborg University. And it's one of those universities established in the beginning of the 70s that was highly inspired and influenced by what happened in the late 60s in relation to what university was. You know, the breaking down of authorities and new ways of learning, new ways of educating the students and how to engage students and how to involve students in the whole political setup of the university. And the Aalborg University, together with Roskilde University in Denmark, were results of that, with a fairly critical perspective of the whole thing, society and the university as such. And as Galit was pointing at, I think that's 10 years ago, more or less, that our PBL section in relation to engineering education was named chair by UNESCO. And we are, as a PBL university, I think we're ranked among the highest of all in the whole world. These rankings, you know. But I have to say it. I was not told back home that I should say it, but I feel I have to say it. So yes, we are highly recognized for doing PBL, which is problem and project oriented. So it's actually PPBL. So problem in relation to what are problems, and these are societal, these are global. It's not scientific problems that you solve in a laboratory. It's problems out there that we look at independently of where we are in the institutions, and if it's in humanities or social science or engineering or natural science, it's always related to things out there that we try to deal with, and we try to solve. All research, and that was decided a couple of years ago at the university, all research, education, projects, our projects as researchers, but also student projects, have to be measured within the framework of the Sustainable Development Goals. And that should be made explicit in your research, in projects, your own, or in students' projects as well. So that's really our mission. We have some sort of manifest at Aalborg University that reads knowledge for the world. And you can look it up on the university's website. It's 5 pages, which is a sort of manifest that you have to abide to as a researcher and lecturer and as a student as well. Return to problem and project means that students at our place, they work together. So independently of where you are during your undergraduate or graduate curriculum, you work together with in groups with other students at your same education, but also in some cases with students from other educations in order to respect that thing about interdisciplinarity. And that's, yeah, independent on if it's on the first year or the last year of your education. I think we all know that we learn best together. And each project group, independent of the semesters, they have an attached supervisor. And the supervisor is a sort of collaborator on projects that they work with. And they have a project each semester that fills up half of their time of their project or of the semester work. Okay, returning to Techno anthropology as some sort of case. of exemplary sample, as I see it, of interdisciplinarity and hybrid imagination, and sort of try to walk you through not curricula or whatever, but on a more overall conceptual level, which are the ideas behind that sort of education, how can we do it? So yes, humans and technologies, we are extremely strong together, and the reason why is that we are incredibly slow and we are incredibly inaccurate, but we are brilliant. And technology is incredibly fast. It's incredibly accurate, precise, but it's also stupid. Say now. Let's see.
Even smart technologies are stupid.
Even smart technologies are stupid. Let's face it. Up until now, let's see. Well, things may happen in the future in the post-human or transhuman era, where these things change, that the equation thing changes. But continuing on the line of Katrina, together we are a very powerful thing that sort of transcends even our imagination of what we can do through and with technology. But of course, on that route, we have to be critical, because yes, we shape technology, technologies shape us, as John Floridi said back in the On Life Manifesto from 2015. And what he stated back then was that we shape critically technology, and technology shape us. What I lack there is the adjective in Floridi's line of thought. What is it then that technology does to us as we critically shape, or should critically shape, technology? What is it that technology does to us, just besides shaping? So we ought to consider that in our relation with technology, which is, I think, is a critical question that should be posed within post-phenomenology. And we have the capacity of posing that sort of question. The triangle is something that we work with in techno-anthropology. It's sort of our outset. And I had the triangle, the techno-anthropological triangle, just a couple of hours ago in the presentation, but Gavin said, it becomes too long, it becomes too weary. So yours is much more interesting on that note. So I sort of hit it, and then I took this one out. But behind that, there's actually the outset for how we think techno-anthropology as this interdisciplinary and combining thing that addresses issues that are spread out through the curricula and present out there. So behind that, this triangle, we got other artifacts and things in the techno-anthropological triangle. We got the experts, and then we got the users up here. And then there's these intersections in between these points in the triangle. And that's where action takes place. That's where we try to act in relation to which are the artifacts, which are the users, how can we combine, how can we conclude, how can we include, how can we do what is needed in order to produce what I have coined as techno design, because I want techno in front of everything, as you've learned already, independent of what we're talking about. So how do we combine society and what's part of society, systems, users, stakeholders, politicians, and so forth? And we can even granulate that even further, because as said, I'm into health informatics as well. And I got patients and relatives and whatever also present up there as part of the citizen user stakeholder group, and do what we then learn students: participatory design approaches and tools for doing participatory design, user involvement, talking about sustainable transition independently of where you are now. You have to phrase and frame sustainability. I tend to, I don't know, I've heard about sustainability the past 15 years, and I tend to address it more with responsibility. I like responsibility more as a concept than sustainability, but sustainable, you can't escape it. Transition and using, of course, anthropology as an approach to learn and dig into and be what is needed in between technology and humans, as Catherine was talking about. Here, combining artifacts, experts, science, and nature. We do techno science, and that's already established thing. We know that. And we do that with responsibility. We think about facts, which are the outset for experts in sciences. But we also think normativity. And the way that we address ethics is not addressing ethics through the lenses of Kant or Aristotle or whoever knows, or Locke or whoever made up ethical principles for how to deal with how we manipulate or address nature, but it comes out of the context, these principles that arise when we deal with stuff, context dependent. And then I also came up with the term of techno-publics, which is sort of way of combining science and society, combining experts and citizens, combining who's ever there in the game. You know, you've got doctors, you've got patients, nurses, everything with different types of knowledges that has to be combined, and you can talk about politics of technology and the approaches pretty much in line with what I also wrote in that paper that you read about what to do, doing action research, and the thing about interactional expertise, which is one of the main expertises that a techno-anthropologist, so to say, is capable of combining all of this. Back just shortly about the curriculum. First semester starts here. So they learn to know about users in relation to this. Second semester is about artifacts and things in relation to that. Third semester is about experts. Fourth semester is about the intersection, that's participatory design. They learn the tool, user involvement, and so forth. Fifth semester is here. Responsible and ethical approaches in relation to combining science and experts. And last semester, sixth in the bachelor, is here because that's the most complicated one at all. So we build on in our education in relation to this framework that I showed. The lizard here, true enough, is also a way of imagining or showing, representing what this hybrid imaginary research program and education is all about. We got specific technological domains that we address in the education. We got medical tech, medical informatics as one fixed point. We got energy tech in relation to sustainability, which is one main area as well. And I would say this is what I'm into. So I like this next as well. And that one. This one over here is actually quite some, pragmatics is also a part of the game. Originally, these 12 years ago, the Department of Energy Technology, hardcore energy tech, they offered themselves as part of the program. So we said, oh, wow, hallelujah, come along. So that's the reason why they're there. It could have been other, could have been mechanical engineering, but they offered their collaboration and became integrated part of the education, because all of these actors here, they are integrated in the program. They are owners of the program. Together with my department, I as overall leader of it, we've got humanities, we've got my own department, which is Department of Planning, which is sort of, soft engineering. At least that's what basically people think of themselves. And then we got these hardcore guys. These are also fairly soft. This design guys. And then we've got the spine, which is, as you were talking about, is basically made out of social and science technology studies, anthropology, philosophy, and social science. Sort of keeps things together. And of course, all of these representatives of IT and energy tech and medical tech and so forth, they have a deep expertise in their field, but they are, of course, open to entering into this sort of program. And they are, as I read it, because of university, yeah, I'm almost there. This is the last one. Yeah, I made it. So, techno-anthropology is, as I see it, an exemplary sample of interdisciplinarity at my university. Unfortunately, the institution, pressed by government's focus on sharpening everything and getting everything, optimized and functional, and thinking about employability and so forth, have chosen to cut some, or quite a large bit, of this program on techno-anthropology. It will still exist, and we are allowed to run in our current configuration for the next 10 years. So things may change on the way, and might not need to cut down, because I think that's a really stupid decision. And the reason why is that our dean from the technical faculty of IT and design is a really silo thinking, mathematical address, totally focused on its own stuff, and does not see the qualities in interdisciplinary work across the campus and involving different faculties, and of course there's a lot of power going on there between these silos and the deans and so forth, and we're so to say caught on that. But what I see is, okay, hybrid imagination must be the conclusion of matter, technologies, actors, users, practices, interpretations. This very both phenomenological. and the co-working of different professions, disciplines, organizations, and institutions, triple, quadruple, quintuple helix, or whatever we can think of helixes on our way that we need to act upon, and of course that would be techno activism, as I was saying. I put techno in front of everything. As we started the program back then 12 years ago, people thought techno-anthropology. Is that about techno music?
I never heard this one.
No, it's not about techno and techno environments in relation to music and whatever happens in that sort of environment. Where we, are supposed to solve these emerging and incumbent problems and challenges of contemporary life and society. And I think any sort of educational program should be addressed in that direction. So that was my words on that account.
Thanks a lot, Lars. If there are any questions, technical questions?
I have a question.
Okay. Please, Vlad.
Okay. Maybe it's more addressed to Catholic, but it's about both terminology. You discussed that everything should aim to be practical and good. We also discussed it with your dean.
Mm-hmm.
And do you find this line of thought of post-phenomenology something that's practical for teachers, not only for researchers?
Yes.
For teachers themselves, and if so, how should they assess students according to this line of thought?
This is a very good question. First of all, I think it will have practical applications, not just in education, but also in industry and design, in the society as a whole. Because in all of our projects, we have seen the development of educational technologies and other kinds of technologies that never worked when they actually came out to be met with human engagement. So engineers had imaginaries. I didn't put that in here, but they had imaginaries about who the humans were. In our last project, the Wheeler project, where we studied the development of robots in labs and followed them out with users, it was very clear that these imaginaries of the users were not how things were in practice. So I do think a post-phenomenological approach where you actually take seriously human technology, the relations that emerge in these encounters between humans and technology are very important for making better, education and better society in a way. So now you ask another question is, how do you assess it? And that is a tricky thing because, as we said, both Don Eide had this notion of a designer fallacy. The designers imagine how their technologies will be used, but our research show it rarely is used in that way. And so things are situated. And how do you measure these issues when they're situated? Actually, you cannot put up these very sharp parameters. And I think maybe what we could do is discuss if other kinds of measurements should be taken into account. For instance, if people are happy with technologies, or they think they have improved their lives, or I don't know, and I hope somebody will take up these questions and do more research on it. But I can't really give you an answer because I haven't studied it. But it's a very good question, and I think you should apply for a project.
So,
yeah.
You want to add something, or?
I think we do it through at least a techno-anthropology. I can tell that we have approximately a year. We have 30 master theses that are produced within our program. and at least 1/3 are both phenomenological, rooted, often in hybrids, where they combine, they take things from post-phenomenology, may take things from critical theory as well, if they have a very normative or political stance on their projects. And then they use anthropology. And if they do it in a quick and proper way, which we address in techno-anthropology, because time is money, and industry and the world out there, they do not have time for an anthropologist to be around for a year or a year and a half or whatever. They do things something taught and learned in how to do things quick and proper. And I think we've gotten there in order to be able to assess their work in relation to address this technology, human relation thing. And we got in a sensor course. Say that the assessment committee for
Censorship.
the censorship.
Assignments, censure.
Yeah. Those that censor the thesis comes from both the engineering censorship and the anthropology censorship, which also assures quality.
I just commented what I believe Ilya and myself are trying to do now is trying to make the post-phenomenological practice a bit practical, more practical.
Yeah, and that's exactly, and that's probably what post-phenomenology, or you do practical work and do as well, right? Do not practice as much. But our students, they really do it, and you can see it.
Coming soon.
Can you see that actually really moving from entities to relations? I mean, to the relation, it is a point, and it opened our new horizons to solve the problem that Gilad mentioned just now. I have a feeling of that.
This
It's a simple idea, but genius idea.
Yeah. And that's at least the techno-anthropology it's not so much what happens at the points of the triangle. It's much more the intersections. That's interesting and gives something.
Yeah. Cool. We can have a few minutes break if you need a biological break. If you need, no, or if not, we can continue with our commentators. Yeah, I see a nod there. Okay, so now we move to the next part of the seminar with our commentators from the department. Arnon, you're the first, right? No, Danny is the first. Okay, so Danny, please, the floor is yours, and then it will be followed with Arnon.
Right.
Maybe we should take up the slides.
Yeah. I think that's unplugged. Cool.
So good afternoon, everyone. First, thank you both Lars and Catherine for being here and for the intriguing papers. I don't know if you can share, you received the articles about. I received several articles in the past week, and based on these articles, I actually built my commentary. So this is my first comment. Second, thank you, Dalit and Ilya, for this very nice event. I must say that I read it and I was a little bit overwhelmed by associations, and I wasn't sure what I'm going to do today. And frankly, I'm not sure yet what I'm going to do today. So I decided that I would write some notes. So I'm going to write some associations. I hope that it's not going to be too inconsistent or too incoherent, because there is a cluster of ideas, can be a little dense. So if you lose me, just raise your hand and tell me, Nani, you went too far, you know, down this hallway. So, I think that the last comment of class was about the politics or about the ethics, the socio-political aspects, and I thought to make, you know, a title of this comment as the politics of imagination, but honestly, this is not what it eventually was. So, after reading Professor Katrin Hasa's and Professor Rasputin's intriguing articles, I recalled the 87 book entitled Architecture Review, which was written by the Irish engineer and the social activist Mike Cool, decades before the widespread algorithms to our everyday life. Cooley realized the possible ramification of automation of social, cultural, and political life. Akin to current debates about the risks of big data and artificial intelligence, Cooley and his peers were concerned about dehumanization and loss of human skills, corollary of automation. His genuine concern regarding the envisioned technological future was expressed in an article that was published in the 70s in Artificial Intelligence and Society journal. He said, "The tragic waste our society makes its most precious asset, the skills, ingenuity, energy, creativity, and enthusiasm of ordinary people, and the myth that computerization, automation, and the use of robotics devices will automatically free human beings from soul-destroying, back-breaking tasks and leave them free to engage in more creative work." The vehement call for reconsidering the assumption of utopian visions of new technologies was originated back in the 70s as a response to various initiatives to replace labels with machine, such as the Lucas plan in England. I will not talk about it, what was the plan, but what was the ground. Those initiatives offered an alternative vision based on human-machine symbiosis rather than human-centered systems. The concern, as Cooley indicated, is not limited to labor in and of itself, but relates to how individuals, communities, and societies envision human relations, as well as to broader ontological issues pertaining to the meaning of being fully human. The inspiring question that was originally raised by Marx in the Capital of what is the difference between being an architect and being a bee is not merely about knowledge, skills, or even about fundamental questions regarding human nature. Rather, it induces a careful examination of the socio-political forces that, inter alia, determine how individuals and societies grapple with ontological questions concerning the meaning of being a fully human, as well as how people imagine their own and collective future. As Cooley argues, either we will have a future in which human beings are reduced to a sort of bee-like behavior, reacting to the system and equipment specified for them, or we will have a future in which masses of people, consciousness of their skills and abilities, in both a political and technical sense, decide that they are going to be architects of a new form of technological development, which will enhance human creativity and mean more freedom of choice and expression rather than less. Thus, as we consider the link between digital technology and education, it is essential that beyond questioning how new technologies influence on teaching and learning, we need to realize the political dimensions of new media. Those dimensions entail the various forms of imagination. In this sense, Hasa argues that, quote, with the advent of cheap technologies, easy access to media and cameras, the very production of techno-fantasies has changed in importance. From being a source of inspiration and a driver of scientific endeavors, Imaginaries have in our country essentially become a business model to secure funding for other political agendas. She argues that Socratic ignorance is vital for scrutinizing our predisposition, beliefs, and convictions. Rasputin offers a compelling analysis of what he calls hybrid imaginations, which I studied. He contends that in light of the intricacies of hybrid imaginations, quote, we need an ontology, epistemology, and methodology that manage to embrace this complexity. In what follows, I would like to raise a few remarks in response to both ideas. I will first look at some epistemological aspect of teaching and learning in digital times, that will be followed by a few ontological remarks. Reading the works of Hasa reminded me of a paper that I wrote a few years ago entitled The Loss of Aura in Education. This section will open with an excerpt from the paper, following a more concrete account on Botin and Hasa's papers. In Peter's Weir's successful film, The Truman Show, Truman Burbank, the star of a reality show, has been living in a mega studio since his birth. He spends his fictional life in a lovely American town. His reality may symbolize the American dream: nice house, pretty wife, stable job, and a pleasant young man who greets everybody in the same daily cliches. In case I don't see you, good afternoon, good evening, and good night. Truman's world turns upside down when he realizes that he has lived in a fake world that symbolizes the world outside. A chain of strange events that had occurred as a result of the show's production errors, like a cinema spot that fell from the sky, revealed the false narrative of his life. The last scene of the film, when Truman sailed toward the end of the studio and toward the scenery, can be interpreted as a moment of illumination. The world of Truman exists in the reality of simulacra, a reality that is represented by simulations. But beyond simulations, there is no more connection between reality and the world. The simulacra world is distorted, masked, and manipulated. According to Baudrillard, there are 4 stages of distorting the world representation. And this is the point that I'm sorry that I don't have a presentation, but I will try to do it slowly. The first stage is a reflection of a profound reality. The second, it masks and denatures a profound reality. The third, it makes the absence of a profound reality. And the last one, it has no relation to any reality whatsoever. It is its own pure simulacra. As seen, each stage represents a level of appearance. While the image at the first stage is clear, there is an increase of distortion in each level that finally becomes fully distorted. Simulacra. In a world of simulacra, the relationship between the object, the origin, and the simulated object is vague. Thus, illusion is no longer possible because the real is no longer possible. Even the material production has become a simulation of the real thing. Since objects have different levels of simulation, it has become harder to find a straight line between the real and the simulation. Information in the digital age represents a filtered reality that is located within the range of 4 stages of simulacra. It manipulates one's perceptions, knowledge, and preferences. Rees Walter Benjamin notably described the changing relationships between the subject and the object. Baudrillard elaborates on this notion and argues that the inherent distance between the subject and the object has vanished. Baudrillard argues that we acquire more information, that as we acquire more information, we have less meaning. It correlates between the capitalist mass media and the destruction of meaning. Instead of creating meaning, the media simulates an overwhelming amount of information. Knowledge in the age of simulacra is not prompt for intellectual discourse, but rather for a modern ceremony of communication. Quote, communication is no longer achieved through a symbolic medium, but through a technical one. As media excludes the bounded relation of culture with knowledge, in a society that glorifies instantaneously simulated knowledge, it is not surprising that rather than developing the appreciation for experience, education and knowledge are perceived mainly as instrumental tools, as Ilya just mentioned. Yes, as we consider the notion of imagination as clearly developed in the 2 articles or by the 2 scholars we have today, involves both symbolic and instrumental meanings. Examining the epistemological dimensions of imaginary, technological innovations in education requires us to pay heed to how knowledge is produced, deployed, and interpreted. The importance of enhancing our ability to evaluate and discern different forms of knowledge, as Botin points out in the opening of his article, is particularly important in light of current global challenges, such as, quote, climate change, inequity, and migration, end quote. He develops the idea of hybrid imagination as a means to examine various types of experience and knowledge. Quote, a hybrid imagination can be defined as a combination of scientific technical problem-solving competence with an understanding of the problem that needs to be solved, end quote.
To some extent, hybrid imagination can be understood as an attempt to balance between two contesting views of technology, technological determinism and constructivism. In brief, technological determinism rests on the assumption that societies have no vital role in shaping and influencing the development of technology, and its production is a result of natural and fixed progress of development. This approach echoes Marx's critique on production and division between labor, the product, and producers. Perhaps the major problem of the technological determinism is decontextualizing technology from its concrete conditions, as well as from mutual relationship between technology and society. Unlike technological determinism, I love these words. Social constructivism assumes that social agents have an important role in determining the desired solution for technological problems or technological needs. If the solution for technological problem is influenced by social agents, then it is also possible that the problem and the need for which technology was invented in the first place would be altered. Hybrid imagination, in this sense, reconciles the tension between these two understandings of technology. I believe that in light of current epistemological challenges, or difficulties or problems, it is essential to also consider the hegemony of scientific rationality and its power to influence and control social ethics, as was analyzed by Foucault in his model of power and knowledge. But recognizing that technology is far from being neutral is the prerequisite for transforming our knowledge in hyper-technical times is understood and interpreted. This conviction is critical as we consider what Alexander Means calls algorithmic communication, which refers to a web of corporate interests and speculative narratives that project socio-technical solutions and futures for school and society based on technology platforms. What is at stake is, as I argued earlier, is the conditions in which our imaginations, or in this case, the imaginary of teachers and students, are constructed. Ben Williamson's forcefully claimed that socio-technical imaginaries are not just science fiction fantasies. The dreamscapes of future that are dreamt up in science laboratories and technical departments sometimes through collective efforts become stable and shared objectives that are used in the design and production of actual technology and scientific innovation. Development that then incrementally produce or materialize the desired future. Against such a deterministic vision of reality and schooling, the teens called for Techno activism in the perspective of hybrid imagination is important, as it challenges what he rightly refers as an naive understanding of human being in charge of and overseeing world and reality through our mastering and control of technology that was approached. That naive understanding can be understood, among other factors, as the grounds for blurring between reality and virtuality, which we referred in our article, or between truth and imaginaries. Hasa noted the statement that, and we would like it, everything you can imagine is real. Post-phenomenology in this sense helps us better understand the complex and subtle relations between our perceptions and our imagination. Following Vygotsky, Hasa outlines the distinction between fantasy imaginaries and realist imaginaries, arguing that we need to advance Socratic ignorance or to ask new questions of what technologies can do to our imaginaries and perceptions of the world with a notion of wonder and critical questioning about it. This claim is of great import as we consider the rapid changes of new technologies and the ways in which we can transform collective imaginaries. The critical point, in my view, is the commodification and fetishization of imagination by techno. Yevgeny Morozov, who provides an inclusive analysis of digital culture, warns that one of the dangers of current times is what he called solutionism, the assumption that all problems to be dealt with via apps, sensors, and feedback loops, all provided by startups. The result, as Means explains, is to enclose our social imagination and replace it with what Morozov calls algorithmic regulation or internet centrism. This critique is congruent with what Habermas described long ago as the colonization of the Lebenswelt by the system. Simply put, the reduction of society to techno-managerial rationality entails the erosion of our ability as a society in general, and as teachers and students in particular, to grapple with complex everyday issues, let alone to envision and imagine the future through different lenses. Thus, as Hasa rightly claims, Socratic ignorance as a point of departure to deal with everyday issues, quote, enable us to question our assumptions about how imaginaries are related to our abilities. Evidently, there are questions regarding how we, as educators, can translate the notion of Socratic ignorance in a productive way. While one may rightly suggest that Socratic ignorance can help us scrutinize the nature of imaginaries and to recognize our limited knowledge of what Freud defines as unfinishedness, may for some people inadvertently reinforce a distorted representation of reality. Demystifying the fine line between fantasy and realist imaginary is therefore one of the challenges of current education. While I would not be able in this response to capture the pedagogical dimensions, I do believe that considering the ontological dimensions of living in times of digital culture is necessary for developing a transformative pedagogical approach. Khalid, how much time do I have? 5 minutes? 3 minutes. I opened this talk with the distinction between being an architect or a geek. This distinction goes deeper to what is the meaning of being a fully human. How can we negotiate between the symbolic and the material world? And what are the conditions in which we can envision a transformative reality, in which we can transcend beyond what Wendy Brown indicates as being homo economicus? Or if we follow Zygmunt Bauman's liquid world, how can we balance between surrendering to a volemic consumerist culture and overpowering it? Indeed, there are various philosophical directions in which we can respond to these timely challenges. Personally, I'm informed by both pragmatism and critical theories as a means to realize the structural hegemonic forces that perpetuate social status quo, as well as pedagogical frameworks that will support the link between learners, communities, and reality. Post-phenomenology, as Burton points out, embraces the hybridity of these philosophical traditions. Moving beyond the status quo must reject a neutral perception of technology and develops a more identical self. The notion of sublimity, as Burton suggests, can support a form of ontological transition, which on the one hand doesn't fall to utopian naivety, and on the other hand doesn't fall into dystopian understanding of reality. Techno activism in this sense offers a constructive theoretical proposal for thinking about how we can move beyond the colonization of the levels held by the system, or if you will, by the technical realm or the technique, without sacrificing the great progress in technologies offer us. In the case of education, the task is to create the conditions that will support students' capacity to move beyond the technocratic understanding of reality, and to envisage new landscapes, opportunities, and alternatives of living in a world that is mediated and by and through new technologies. It is also essential, as Hasa argues in a paper, Learning with Potentials, that we realize our learning, growth, and concepts are constructed through quote, a collective entangle of materials and social relations. I would like to thank again to Professor Hasa and Professor Rasputin for their thought-provoking papers that open us new windows of thinking regarding technology, society, and education. As a final note, I would like to read a short quote by Mike Cooley. We must not allow our common sense to be bludgeoned into silence by the determinism of science and technology, into believing that the future is already fixed. The future is not out there. It is yet to be built by human beings, and we do have will choices, but these choices will have to be fought for, and the issues are both technical and political. We have to decide whether we will fight for our right to be the architects of the future or allow a tiny minority to reduce us to be like responses. Thank you for listening.
About a minute.
I have one more minute.
Half a minute. Cool. Arnon, the floor is yours. I hope that the screen would work now. Yeah, does it work?
I don't think it.
Ah, you don't need, okay, so let's continue this way. Cool.
Turn the lights on.
Oh, yeah. Magic.
Yes. All right. So thank you very much. It's an honor for me to stand here and comment. And contrary to Dan, I didn't even prepare anything. I just wrote some notes here, but I did read the papers. So some things here reflect echoes some things from the papers that I've read. Ilya mentioned in the beginning that there is a gap between philosophy and education as practiced, at least, and also, of course, educational research. And I thought of talking about this gap and to see how the things that I got from your fascinating works may guide us towards improving education in practice. I began my own academic endeavor without any association to what happens in practice. But over the last 2 years or so, I became more close and to the field and hoping to have some impact on the field, and it all sorts of comes together. So I thought of going through 4 anecdotal issues. First of all, the COVID experience over the last 2 years made a real harm to technology and education, as I see it. So if 2 years ago, only a few of us knew what is technology in learning, technology in education, what can be done, today, everybody thinks they know what is best. So online learning became a synonym with Zoom, and asynchronous learning became synonym with watch a video and answer some questions. And probably the solution to this problem, as Lars mentioned, is to imagine. But this is quite difficult because we are all, as Catherine taught us, are focused on what we already know. So imagining becomes a real problem when we want to large scale it, I think. Actually, even before COVID, the MOOC movement also made a real harm to technology in education, because everybody thought until 2 years ago that online learning is just watching people talking and then answering some quizzes. And this is an example of the problem of how to imagine in large scale. I don't know if you know, the original MOOCs were not the ones that we are used to today. The original MOOCs, they were called C MOOCs. C for, I mean, they were later coined as C MOOCs. C for collaborative or for classic. And they were more about learning together. This is the time where the Constructivism was developed as a learning theory. The online space of the MOOC was just a hub where students and instructors met occasionally, and from which they emerged to other places. And then the current MOOCs are called X MOOCs. X stands for extended. So the large scale of finding meaningful solutions is a problem. So you mentioned PBL, and it was very inspiring to see how PBL is practiced in your university. PBL and later the makers movement, and in between one computer per child initiatives all brought like real potential to education, but none really stayed as a meaningful way of educating or teaching or learning. And the main problem is that they were somehow flattened. PBL is conducted in today's schools, at least in many schools in Israel, is where the teacher dictates the problem to be solved and the questions to be answered and the ways to answer it and the size of the font in which the work will be typed. It's funny, but it's very sad. And makers movement became making kits. This is a trend today. Large scaling the makers movement into classrooms by bringing kits. And one-to-one computers, one computer per child, became a way in which kids in schools sit in front of the teacher, each with their own computer, and just types or watches or doing something. So the solution to this, as I get from your ideas, is not only to use imagination, but also to break all the boundaries, which I'll get in a minute, and have it done in a multidisciplinary way. There is no other way of doing it. Third point, computational thinking. Okay, yeah, I had to get to it, yeah, and Ilya and Gilad will sure understand it. Computational thinking is a mental skill. This is a thought process of how to solve complex problems. But in reality, again, it became a synonym for programming, algorithming in the good case. And when I, in my computational thinking seminar, try to engage the students with this concept, I try to encourage them to think about real life problems they have to solve using this kind of thinking. What's a real life problem to solve with computational thinking? Planning a family trip, for example. And they immediately get it. I mean, they can quite easily using this skill and its sub-skills and make connections to how to plan a trip, because it's really important. It's important to them. And in practice, again, it's going only to programming, and if we are in a very good place to STEM disciplines. But why shouldn't we see more computational thinking in history education or literature education or linguistics? It's classics. And here I'm connected immediately to last triangle, society, nature, and science. And the problem that I recognize using this triangle is that schooling and education in many cases is disconnected, not from only one of the triangle edges, but from all of them. It's not about society, it's not about nature, and it's even, sadly enough, not about science. Yes. So I was very impressed about what you do in your university. It's pretty sad. Yeah. So the solution that I see now is, and of course I saw it before, is to make things much more connected to all of these triangle edges. And the last thing that I think you mentioned it, Klaus, maybe not in these terms. So when you ask people today about technology and education, everybody would tell you artificial intelligence or if they were born just last week, metaverse, this is the newest solution, right? But we know that even artificial intelligence is not that intelligent. It is kind of stupid. And we see that autonomous cars tend to run over black people more than white people. And when we see the very innovative project that its second version was launched only a few weeks ago, I don't know.
DALL-E?
Yeah, DALL-E. Do you pronounce it DALL-E?
DALL-E, yeah.
Yeah, so DALL-E is an artificial intelligence project that can create like drawings based on textual description. So you write a man on a horse and it draws a man on a horse, and very sophisticatedly, if there's such a word, it creates drawings that are really not interesting because we saw it already. It's nothing new there. So can computers really invent or imagine? That's kind of a philosophical question that I don't have an answer because I'm not a philosopher. So a few solutions to these problems, and I hope that nobody here will find them new or innovative. So first of all, I mean, my first rule to do something with the education system is get rid of textbooks. So first of all, just get rid of everything. And now you will have a basis to imagine. Because when you have the textbooks, you don't need to imagine. Next, we should consider that we have some borders constraining the way we educate and teach. And these are borders of time and space, age in most cases, even at university level, undergraduate students, but mostly in K-12 education. We have strict knowledge boundaries between disciplines and in between disciplines. We have strict pedagogical boundaries and hierarchical boundaries. And when we think about these boundaries, technology helps us break them quite easily. And then, of course, the one lesson that I learned from reading and hearing here is try to imagine as much as you can. We have kind of a proof or preliminary proof that this may work. In a study that we've been carrying on here in the last few years, we studied the associations between creativity, but I will make the connections to imagination, and computational thinking, which I want to think about as problem solving. So when we encouraged kids or teenagers to sort of imagine, as I can use these terms now, to be creative, we saw that this indeed improved their skills of problem solving. So that's encouraging. And the last thing is related, I mean, this is a great lesson that I learned, is related to one of the papers of Catherine that I read, and you quote there the following quote: "To live, by definition, is not something one learns." And the argument, of course, is that this statement is not necessarily true. So I want to think about our kids and our students and our parents even, and all of our society as people who should be taught how to live. Setting your own goals, planning your way of achieving the goals, handling situations where your way is patched, or handling situations where your way is successful. And with the spine of the lizard, do it all in a humane way. This is something that we should all teach and learn all the time. This should lead the whole way we perceive the world, which is why I was also very impressed by what you showed us last at your university is not just inspired by the UN's sustainable goals, but actually acting upon. And if we're talking about imagination, maybe academic institutions are the ones who should begin this journey. And unfortunately, this is not happening on large scale yet. We have one university in Israel, and unfortunately, it's not ours, that sets this goal of following Haifa University, who sets the goal of following the sustainable goals of the United Nations. But our measures of success are kind of shallow most of the time. So that's it. I hope it made sense some way. Thank you.
Kathy, would you like to answer some of the comments? You have some ideas? Yeah. Okay, Kathy, please start.
Yeah, thank you to both of you. That was excellent, and I was particularly taken also by the discussion of the political implications of this kind of thinking, and the way that we can maybe think about how new theories of learning and imagination might lead to this kind of techno activism that you were talking about. That doesn't come by itself. We have to develop new ways of thinking and acting with it. And I think that that might also be a task for educational institutions like my own and yours and Lars's, to actually open up for new ways of understanding how to teach in a world where these technologies are mainly created for economic reasons. They are today often created to make money somehow. And people, the children, may not have enough to put up against that. I mean, they need some better tools with their teachers to address these kind of challenges. And I'm sure that you in your educational settings also know how children are sort of sucked into these imaginary worlds, but without actually having something that can help them ask questions about it and meet it with new questions and new desires. And I think that is important to give them that in order to make them better to create their own lives and not just become these bees in the beehive. So I think we have a big task, but I also think your comments show a kind of common ground towards a way we can walk together. So thank you very much.
Yeah, I can only repeat almost what Catherine was saying. I think that the conference in July on designing the Techno Anthropological will be all about this. The ethical, political issues in relation to what to do, because we need to do something independently where we look almost. And designing, there's a double sense in the concept of design. It's not, you sitting and producing something as a designer, but it's also setting up the whole ontological and epistemological framework for how to think and act within the technology. So, and thank you for your very qualified comments.
I'd like to open now the discussion if the audience, if you have any questions or comments or ideas that pops up into your mind while they're hearing all these talks.
Everyone.
Yeah.
With the computational thinking, there is a framework which states that it's comprised of concepts, practices, and perspectives. And in the perspectives dimensions, there is a relation to the world, how the student, assuming that we're talking about education, how the student views the world. But there is nothing, to my understanding, it has to do with the philosophy of technology or post-phenomenology. Do you think that there is a room for broadening this computational thinking assessment framework?
You ask me, yeah. No, I think that would be fantastic, because I think in my mind, computational thinking is very interesting and developed in very applicable ways also. But I do think maybe you lack some understanding of the critical dimensions and also how these ideas of learning, what is actually learning, and where is the body in computational thinking? Where is the movements through space? Where is the motivations, all the challenges that people also meet in their everyday life? I don't know if it's actually possible to enhance computational thinking, but I think it would be a very, very valid effort to try to put in more about how human technology relations evolve through learning with our entangled bodies, and also how complicated that process can be, and how unpredictable even, and open up for these discussions. I think that would be very interesting. So I think there is a good groundwork to work from, but it could be developed further.
Just to add, thank you very much for the question. Wonderful answer. And just to add, we as Galit, we already talked about, we came to conclusion after Gilad began to study this area that from the very beginning it was just hermeneutic relation, only one, and Gilad absolutely clear already said it. But after some times learning, we understood that, like you said, it's a field of research. For example, the last interview of Sesta, he wrote it was kind of problematic phrase. He said, it is not a thinking, it is social movement, which is immediately we understood a provocative phrase, but this person is very good known as a specialist, and he proved it, showed, and his arguments is strong, and we decided that we have to concentrate on this field to analyze computation thinking as a phenomenon rather than of post-phenomenology. Absolutely.
Now in light of this perspective of imagination that we speak about today, it's like you can refer to computational thinking as a way of solving problems. But it's, problems like how to design a trip, as someone said. But maybe we should expand to difficult problems, the kind that Miguel speaks about, problems that you can't solve easily. Okay, problems like global warming. That's a problem, okay? That's a problem, and there is no algorithm for that, at least at the moment. And you need imagination in order to deal with these kind of problems that you don't have solutions for. And the solutionism kind of limit us. So if you think of solutionism with computational thinking, you get that far. And in order to get much farther away, you need to get rid of the solutionism and expand it to other problems like global warming, like this.
Exactly, because there's a problem Armand talked about, which is planning for the peak, is algorithmic problem, which is fine. But now what you mentioned is already going ahead with visual intelligence, some kind of you name it what, and it's exactly what the sister mentioned. It's not just algorithm, it's much more. Maybe 40 years ago, fine with them. And Puppet and all these guys told it. Now we know that it's not enough, which is absolutely interesting for us as a change.
Yeah, and this is what makes the field move ahead. Like, yes, you can take computational thinking as it was 40 years ago. Yeah, okay,
Fine.
but you can take it to exciting places. And this is where we're trying to go with this kind of research. Yeah. More comments? I can have a small spoiler. The two presentations were they stem from chapters that were written for a book that will be published next year. It's about imagination and technology, art and ethics. Yeah, and these are two contributions out of 16 chapters, 17 chapters. It depends. Okay. We'll see soon. But yeah, that's a book that will be out there with the Bloomsbury academics. And we are very excited. Originally, the education and learning wasn't there explicitly, but somehow it pops up from all the papers that I read. And they come from various disciplines. They come from, of course, what is called continental philosophy, but also analytic philosophers. They are engaged with these kind of questions
now.
Yeah,
Which is so interesting because it's really coming into the field.
yeah, and they understand that learning is something, lifelong learning. It's not just a buzzword. It's something that we have each and every day. And maybe with imagination, it's the right way to go with it.
One more
please.
comment. I'd like to ask about intentionality.
I went back in main philosophy.
So in the classic relations of post-phenomenology, the intentionality is going pretty much one way, from the human to the technology and perhaps afterwards to the world. In artificial intelligence, what Galit has actually mentioned for the first time, perhaps the intentionality is going in a different direction from technology to the person. I'd like to hear your thoughts about that.
That's what actually I pointed at when I quoted Bellini and said there's missing an adjective. The next way of dealing with stuff where it says humans critically shape technologies and technology shape humans' thought. Where's the adjective? Where's the intentionality on that note? Because there is, and in some ways we have to unravel what this intentionality is, because it's there. Most certainly it's not just random or anything.
I would say from a post-humanist point of view, the concept of intentionality gets questioned in a way, because from parts of post-human or that kind of approach, the idea that we plan to do something and then we do it is wrong. So it's more, you can reach out to the world, and if intentionality is understood in that way, that would be okay. But intentionality as having intentions and then going after it, that would be questioned, because it would more be like it's entanglement, as I said. So it's in the situated practices, technology and humans come together, so to speak. So intentions arise from within the phenomenon, you could say, with correct. But I don't think post-phenomenology has addressed that deeply enough, actually, yet. So that is of course, from a post-phenomenology comes from phenomenology. So a lot of these issues we deal with one by one, and take them up and go in depth with them. But I think the question of intentionality we could do some more work there, actually.
As an example, Lars' triangle, the way he unpacks the experiencing eye to developers and users and scientists, all of a sudden the intentionality can be richer than that. So instead of saying, yeah, the user has the intentionality reversed and is being subjected, maybe there are some other people out there, and we should further expand our view. And instead of looking with phenomenology as me experiencing the world, maybe I should look to a wider picture and see how I experience the world as other people are shaping it, as politicians are shaping it, as the Ministry of Education, what they do, okay? Or as, I don't know, the Russian government, just as an example.
And materials.
And the
materials we are embodied with, they are co-shaping intentions. I think Peter Paul is also something. Peter Paul could be on this.
Yeah, because Peter Paul has addressed, I don't know if Peter Paul forbid, I don't know if a sort of response to analytical philosophy to say, well, you got it all wrong about intentionality. It says analytical, because intentionality is a conscious, willful action addressed towards something. Where you say, yeah, but that's not how we think intentionality. In post-phenomenology, it's something that is distributed, it's situated, it becomes, and it may be weak in relation to the classical definition of what intentionality as this conscious will address towards something, but that's what is constantly at stake. So intentionality in opposition to what you're saying is always and already there.
So it goes the other way around, if we should say so, or always, all directions.
Yeah.
If I understand correctly. Inherent.
So it happens all the time.
And also because we don't, I think that maybe it's for sure that we, at least to my humble understanding, that we don't actually know what to say, like your question about the intentionality coming not from the machine to us, because we don't, it's like a black box, right? In some ways, the artificial intelligence mechanism and so on. We might have created it, but some aspects of it are now unknown to us.
But I think here we would also question the we, because there is a tendency also in philosophy, I have to say we, and then you have a sort of inclusive collective we. And I think we have to, in our theories, be more specific about who constitute the we's, because some people know about artificial intelligence, how it works, but this we doesn't know its effects because they don't live it, if it's applied somewhere else. So all these things calls for more refined theories, more refined analysis, and going deeper into the question of how human beings become as collective, as diverse. So all these issues. So
good. So thank you very much, and thank you for our speakers. We are now going to the Hachug Tzfoni, so if somebody would like to join us, a beer or eat something, we can continue it in a less formal setting. My back aches from sitting like that, so, yeah. Okay, so see you all.
Thank you very much.
It was great.